My name is Vincent, and if there's one thing I've learned in 22 years of university administration, it's that institutions don't have a conscience. People do, and when those people are ignored, the institution eventually pays the price. If you've ever been made to feel small, been told your principles were a problem, or been pushed out for doing the right thing, then you know what I'm talking about. Stick around, because this story is for you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever seen a manager choose loyalty over competence, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about getting back what's yours. They fired me on a Tuesday. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and smelled faintly of the industrial strength cleaner they used on the carpets over the weekend. It was the smell of trying to erase something. Across the polished oak table sat Brenda, our Director of Human Resources, and my own director, Victor. Brenda wore her usual armor, a charcoal pantsuit so severe it looked like it could deflect bullets, and a carefully neutral expression that was, in itself, an act of aggression. Victor, on the other hand, couldn't manage neutrality. He was fidgeting with a sterling silver pen, a self-congratulatory little smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He looked like a cat who'd finally cornered a mouse it had been tormenting for weeks. Brenda slid a single folder across the table. It wasn't thick. It stopped perfectly centered in front of me, a small beige rectangle of doom. I didn't open it. I knew what it was. "It's a difficult conversation to have, Vincent," Brenda began, her voice a low, practiced monotone. It was the voice she used for budget cuts, for denying tenure, for this, the voice of institutional necessity. The university values a collaborative and unified work environment, and based on recent events and after careful consideration, we feel your continued presence has become untenable. It's creating a divisive atmosphere. A divisive atmosphere. The phrase hung in the air, clinical and obscene. 2 weeks prior, I had filed a 12-page, meticulously documented complaint against Victor. It detailed a clear and undeniable pattern of discriminatory hiring. 3 separate searches for senior analyst positions in our department, all torpedoed by him at the last minute. In each case, the most qualified candidate vetted, interviewed, and recommended unanimously by the hiring committee which I chaired was a woman. 2 were women of color. In each case, Victor had found a reason to override our decision and install a less qualified man. Men he knew. Men from his previous university. Men who were, in his words, a better cultural fit. My complaint hadn't been emotional. It was a sterile, factual account, complete with dates, email chains I was copied on, and direct quotes from Victor himself, quotes he'd carelessly tossed off in meetings thinking he was among friends. Things like, "We need someone who can speak the language of the board, not get bogged down in academic theory," when referring to a brilliant candidate with a doctorate from a rival, more prestigious university. Or, "I'm just not sure she has the gravitas for the role," about a woman who had managed a department twice the size of ours. I had submitted it through the proper channels directly to Brenda's office, as policy dictated. I had requested a formal investigation. For 2 weeks I heard nothing. A black hole of corporate silence. And now this. I wasn't the one being investigated. I was the one being fired. I looked from Brendan's placid, unreadable face to Victor's triumphant one. He had stopped fiddling with the pen and was leaning back in his chair, the picture of managerial authority. He had won. He had complained about my complaint, and HR had taken his side. The message was clear: rocking the boat is a bigger sin than sinking it with corruption. Brenda cleared her throat, a tiny, impatient sound. "The folder, Vincent. It contains the terms of your separation. We're offering a standard severance package contingent on the signing of a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. Of course, the gag order. Pay me to be quiet about the very thing they were firing me for exposing." It was so perfectly, cynically corporate. I didn't move to take the folder. I just looked at Victor. "A divisive workplace, Victor," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Is that what you told her I was creating?" Victor's smirk tightened. He sat forward, planting his elbows on the table, assuming a posture of performative sincerity. "Look, Vince, I'm sorry it came to this. I really am. But you went off the reservation. You took a simple difference in management style and blew it up into something ugly. You made my other staff uncomfortable. You were undermining my authority. My staff, he meant the men he had hired over my objections, the ones who spent their afternoons talking about golf and their weekends on Victor's boat, the very culture he was so keen to protect. I understand, I said, and the silence that followed was more satisfying than any screaming match could have been. The phrase seemed to confuse them. They had prepared for anger, for arguments, for pleading. They were not prepared for quiet acceptance. It unnerved them. Brenda's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Victor's smugness faltered. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. I left the folder sitting on the table. "Keep it," I said. "I won't be needing it." I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. I could feel their eyes on me, two pairs of stunned, suddenly anxious eyes. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried the problem. What they didn't know was that I had already planted a seed in their perfectly manicured lawn, a seed that was about to grow into a thorny, tangled mess that would choke them both. And the beautiful part, the part I savored as I walked down the long, silent hallway for the last time, was that they had given me the very data I needed to do it. They just didn't know it yet. The walk from Victor's office to my own felt like moving through water. Every detail was suddenly in sharp, painful focus. The scuff marks on the linoleum floor, the faded motivational poster of a soaring eagle with the word excellence underneath, the low, familiar hum of the building's ventilation system. It was the soundtrack to 22 years of my life. 22 years of arriving early, staying late, mentoring junior staff, cleaning up other people's messes, and believing on some fundamental level that competence and dedication mattered. It was a slow, quiet funeral procession for a belief system I had carried with me since I was a young man. My office was at the end of the hall. It wasn't large, but it had a window that overlooked the old oak trees on the main quad. I had watched those trees cycle through the seasons 22 times. I'd seen students protest on that lawn, celebrate on it, fall in love on it. It was my small connection to the university's real purpose, a world away from the sterile politics of the administration building. When I stepped inside, the box was already there. A single brown cardboard box sitting on my chair. Security had been efficient. My personal effects, the photo of my wife and daughter, my favorite coffee mug, the small, silly awards I'd won in interdepartmental charity drives were already packed. My laptop was gone. My desk phone had no dial tone. My access had been severed. It was so brutally swift, so impersonal. You're not just fired, you are erased. I picked up the box. It felt heavier than it should have. I walked past the desks of my team. A few of them, the ones who had been there for years, looked up at me with expressions of shock and sympathy. They knew. They didn't know the details, but they knew this wasn't right. They had seen Victor's management style. They had sat in the same meetings. Marcus, a sharp young analyst I'd hired straight out of his master's program 2 years ago, stood up. His face was pale. "Vincent, what's going on?" I just shook my head slightly, giving him a look that I hoped conveyed, "Not now, I'll call you." He understood. He sat back down, his jaw tight with anger on my behalf. The newer guys, Victor's guys, didn't even look up from their screens. To them, I was just a piece of old furniture being moved out. I didn't exist. The drive home was a blur. I remember the weight of the steering wheel in my hands, the rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement. I drove on autopilot, my mind a chaotic storm of shock, humiliation, and a white-hot clarifying anger. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence ringing in my ears. 22 years. A career built brick by brick, a reputation for being steady, for being fair, for being the guy who knew how everything actually worked. All of it dismantled in a 10-minute meeting by a man who measured value in buzzwords and a woman who measured it in liability. My wife, Sarah, saw the car and came out the front door. The look on her face told me she knew instantly. She didn't even have to ask. I got out of the car holding the pathetic little box of my professional life, and she just wrapped her arms around me. I leaned into her. the rigid control I'd maintained all day finally cracking. I didn't cry. It was something deeper than that. It was a hollowing out, a profound sense of dislocation. Who was I, if not Vincent, the guy who ran the analytics department at the university? That evening, I didn't want to talk. I couldn't articulate the swirling vortex in my gut. I needed to move. I changed into my running clothes. It was a habit I'd developed over the years. When a problem at work seemed too complex, too tangled to solve at my desk, I would run. I'd run until the physical exhaustion burned away the mental noise, leaving only the core of the issue. I set out on my usual route, a punishing 7-mile loop through the hills behind our house. The first mile was pure, raw anger. I pushed the pace, my feet pounding against the asphalt, my lungs burning. Divisive. The word echoed with every stride. I wasn't divisive, I was principled. I had seen an injustice, and I had called it by its name. Victor wasn't just a bad manager, he was a liability cloaked in a tailored suit. My mind flashed back to the first time I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was a problem. It was about a year ago. The search was for a senior data architect. It was a critical role. The leading candidate was a woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was, to put it mildly, a rock star. She'd built entire systems for a major tech company, had published in peer-reviewed journals, and in her interview she diagnosed a fundamental flaw in our data pipeline that even I had missed. She was perfect. The hiring committee was ecstatic. We presented our recommendation to Victor. He scanned her resume, his expression dismissive. He tapped his pen on her PhD from Stanford. A little too academic, don't you think, Vince? We need a doer, not a thinker. He then proceeded to champion a candidate named Greg, a guy he'd worked with at his last job. Greg's resume was fine. It was adequate. He had no advanced degree, no publications, and his experience was with systems a decade out of date, but he had played golf with Victor. Greg got the job. 6 months later, our data pipeline had a catastrophic failure, the very one Dr. Reed had predicted. It took my team 3 weeks of sleepless nights to fix the mess Greg had been unable to prevent. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. Then there was the next search, and the one after that. The pattern was always the same. An exceptionally qualified woman or minority candidate would be the front runner, only for Victor to invent a reason to disqualify them. He was a master of coded language, not a team player, lacks executive presence, not the right fit for our long-term strategic vision. It was all nonsense, a flimsy cover for his desire to build a department of men who looked and thought just like him. The last straw was Dr. Alani Sharma. She was young, brilliant, and hungry. She was applying for a junior analyst role, a role I was personally overseeing. Her work on predictive modeling as a graduate student was more advanced than anything my current team was doing. She was exactly the kind of person we needed to bring new energy and ideas into a department that was growing stagnant under Victor's cronyism. I championed her. I mentored her through the interview process. She was flawless. The team loved her. I went to Victor's office, her file in my hand, ready for a fight. I laid out the case. I showed him her work. He listened, nodding, with that same infuriatingly smug look on his face. When I was done, he smiled. "She's impressive, Vince, no doubt, but I've already offered the position to Chad, my brother-in-law's kid, just graduated, needs to get his foot in the door. He's a good kid, eager to learn." Chad, his brother-in-law's kid. I had seen Chad's resume. He had a business degree from an unaccredited online university, and his only work experience was as a sales associate at a mobile phone store. The insult was so profound, so blatant, that it broke something in me. It wasn't just bad management anymore, it was a rot. It was a deep, systemic contempt for the very idea of merit that a university is supposed to represent. That was when I decided to file the complaint. I knew it was a risk. I knew Victor was protected, but I had to do it. I owed it to Evelyn Reed. I owed it to Alani Sharma. I owed it to the 22 years of my own life I had poured into that place. By mile 5 of my run, the anger had cooled, forged by the rhythmic pounding and the physical pain, into something hard and sharp: resolve. They thought I was a dinosaur, an old piece of furniture to be discarded. They thought I was a simple man who would take my severance and fade away. They had fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I wasn't just the guy who ran the department, I was the guy who had built its foundations. And I was also the guy who knew every single rule in the university's labyrinthine handbook, especially the ones they thought no one ever read. As I rounded the last corner, my lungs screaming, my legs like lead, my phone, which I'd brought with me, buzzed in my pocket. I slowed to a walk, pulling it out. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was from. "They're telling people you retired. Victor is walking around like he won the lottery. This is wrong. Let me know if you need anything. Mintesemmer bed. Mintesemmer molde schreibt. For Marcus." He had found a way to reach out. He was confirming what I already suspected. They weren't just firing me, they were trying to rewrite history, to paint my forced exit as a quiet, voluntary retirement. It was one insult too many. I stood there, sweat dripping down my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I typed back a simple reply. "Thanks, Marcus. Stay put for now. I've got a plan. Don't talk to anyone about this." I put the phone away. A plan. It was more than a plan. It was a time bomb. And the beautiful, ironic thing was, I had used the university's own policies to build it. As I walked the last few hundred yards back to my house, a grim smile touched my lips for the first time that day. The shock was gone. The humiliation was gone. All that was left was the cold, clean certainty of what I had to do next. Victor and Brenda thought they had ended a problem. They had no idea they had just started a war. And I was the only one who had a map of the battlefield. Foresight is a funny thing. People mistake it for paranoia until it pays off. For years, I'd watched the university's administration operate with the subtle, unspoken arrogance of an institution that believes itself to be above reproach. Decisions were made in closed rooms, dissent was labeled as negativity, and loyalty was valued far more than integrity. I had survived by being quiet, competent, and indispensable, but I was never naive. I always knew that a system that protects its own above all else is a system that will one day turn on anyone who threatens the status quo. So I prepared. My preparation wasn't a conspiracy, it was just due diligence. As a public university, we were by law an entity of the state. That meant we were subject to public records laws. It was a detail buried in the employee handbook, a dusty corner of our institutional reality that most people, including senior management, conveniently forgot about. They operated like a private corporation, forgetting they were accountable to the public they served. I never forgot. About 6 months before my firing, long before the situation with Alani Sharma, I had a nagging feeling. Victor's cronyism was becoming more blatant. I started to wonder just how deep the rot went. Was it just him, or was it the system itself? Specifically, I wondered about HR. Brenda's department was a fortress. Information went in, but nothing ever came out. Complaints were handled, issues were addressed, but there was never any transparency. So I decided to test the system. I drafted a public records request, not as Vincent, the department manager, but as Vincent, a private citizen. I didn't file it through university channels. I went through the state government's official portal. My request was simple, precise, and deliberately broad. I asked for anonymized aggregate data from the HR department's internal case management system for the last 5 years. I didn't ask for names or specifics of any single case. I asked for statistics. I wanted to know the number of formal complaints filed against senior executives defined as director level and above. I wanted that number broken down by the gender of the complainant and the gender of the executive. And I wanted to know the outcome of each case, upheld, dismissed, or settled. It was a shot in the dark, and I knew it. I fully expected them to fight it, to claim privacy concerns, to bog me down in legal challenges. But my request was carefully worded by a lawyer friend of mine who specialized in governmental transparency. He helped me frame it in a way that was almost impossible to deny without looking like they had something to hide. We requested only statistical data, with no personally identifiable information, making the privacy argument moot. I filed it and waited. The state law gave them 30 days to respond. On day 29, I got a formal letter from the university's general counsel. It was full of legalese, but the gist was that my request was overly broad and burdensome. It was the classic bureaucratic stonewall, but my lawyer friend had prepared me for this. We had already drafted the appeal. In it, we argued that aggregate statistical data could not possibly be burdensome for any reasonably modern case management system to generate. We weren't asking them to read through files, we were asking for a database query. A 5-minute job for any competent IT person. We sent the appeal, and the clock started again. This time they knew we were serious. A protracted legal battle over a public records request would look terrible. It would attract the kind of attention they assiduously avoided, so they complied. 2 weeks after I filed the formal complaint against Victor and 1 week before they fired me, a large manila envelope arrived at my home address. Inside was a single USB drive. No letter, no context, just a memory stick. I plugged it into my personal computer, my heart pounding. It contained a single file, a massive, sprawling Excel spreadsheet. It was exactly what I had asked for. Anonymized raw data, case numbers, filing dates, complaint categories, demographic data of the parties involved, and a column for disposition. It was a treasure trove of institutional secrets. I spent that entire weekend before my firing hunched over my screen, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face in the dark of my home office. I wasn't a data analyst for nothing. I started filtering, sorting, creating pivot tables, and what I found was chilling. It was worse than I had imagined. Over the past 5 years, there had been a total of 43 formal complaints filed against senior executives. Of those, 17 were discrimination complaints. Of those 17, 12 were filed by female employees against male executives. I created a new column in my spreadsheet and marked each of these 12 cases. Then I scrolled over to the disposition column. The results were stark. Dismissed, 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 dismissed. Every single one. A perfect, unbroken 100% dismissal rate. It was a jaw-dropping statistic. It was statistically improbable to the point of being impossible in any fair system. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a policy. It was the digital fingerprint of a deeply, fundamentally corrupt system designed to do one thing: protect powerful men. Brenda wasn't just a director of HR, she was the architect and guardian of a system that silenced women and shielded their abusers. Victor wasn't an anomaly she had to deal with. He was a product of the very culture she had cultivated. My own complaint, I realized with a cold certainty, was already in that spreadsheet in spirit, its fate preordained before I even typed the first word. This was my leverage, this was the secret plan. It was no longer about my word against Victor's, it was about their own data against their own lies. After I was fired, the first person I called after texting Marcus back was my lawyer friend, Bill. I explained what had happened. He whistled low and long when I told him about the severance offer and the NDA. Standard procedure, he said. They want to buy your silence. Don't sign anything, Vince. Not a damn thing. What they did is classic retaliation. Firing you for filing a protected complaint is illegal as hell. I know, Bill, I said, but I have something better than a simple retaliation claim. I then told him about the public records request and the data I had found. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Jesus, Vince, he finally said, his voice laced with a new kind of respect. You son of a gun. That's not a smoking gun. That's a nuclear bomb. That spreadsheet proves intent. It proves a pattern and practice of discrimination and retaliation. This isn't just about you anymore. This is systemic. Exactly, I said. So what's our next move? He laughed, a sharp, predatory sound. Our next move? You've already made it. You just need to deliver the payload. Forget a civil suit for now. That's slow and expensive. You're going straight to the top. You're going to file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC. They're the federal agency that investigates this stuff. And you're not just going to file on your own behalf. You're going to attach that spreadsheet. You're going to show them that your case isn't an isolated incident, but the latest example of a deeply ingrained institutional policy. They live for stuff like this. That night, I received another text from Marcus. Victor held a team meeting today. He told everyone you left to pursue other opportunities, said the department needed new energy. People are quiet. The old guard looks sick. Chad, the new kid, asked who you were. The casual cruelty of it, the attempt to erase me, only strengthened my resolve. I sat down at my computer and began to draft the complaint to the EEOC. I was calm, methodical. I attached 3 documents. The first was a PDF of the original 12-page complaint I had filed with HR against Victor. The second was a scan of my termination letter with its absurd justification of creating a divisive workplace. And the third, the crown jewel, was the Excel spreadsheet. I wrote a simple 1-page cover letter explaining the source of the data and highlighting the most damning statistic, the 100% dismissal rate for discrimination complaints filed by women against male executives. I took my time. I reread every word. I made sure it was perfect. It was the most important document I had ever written. It wasn't just for me. It was for Dr. Reed, for Dr. Sharma, for the 12 anonymous women in that spreadsheet whose voices had been systematically silenced by Brenda's fortress of a department. I was giving them their voice back. Before I sent it, I created a new email account, an anonymous one. I sent one last message to Marcus. Things are in motion. You're going to hear things soon. Lay low, be a ghost, just observe. He replied almost instantly. Got it. Give 'em hell, Vincent. I took a deep breath, my cursor hovering over the send button on the EEOC submission portal. It felt like standing on the edge of a high dive, a moment of pure potential energy before the fall. They had underestimated me. They saw me as a relic, a man past his prime, a problem to be managed and discarded. They never imagined I was a man who read the fine print. They never imagined I knew how to use their own bureaucratic machinery against them. They thought they were playing checkers. I had been setting up a chessboard for months. I clicked the button. The email disappeared into the ether. The silent takeover had begun. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. It was a strange, disorienting limbo. My entire life had been structured around the rhythms of the university, the academic calendar, the budget cycles, the weekly staff meetings. Now there was just silence. I tried to build a new routine. I went for my runs, helped Sarah in the garden, started tackling the list of home improvement projects I'd been putting off for years. But my mind was elsewhere. It was in a federal office building in a city hundreds of miles away, waiting for a stranger to open an email. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach lurched. I was waiting for a sign, any sign, that my carefully constructed bomb had landed. Marcus was my only link to the world I'd been ejected from. He was being smart, keeping his head down, but he sent me small, cryptic updates. Week 1, Victor is on a power trip, promoting his buddies, talking about a new era of efficiency. Nobody is buying it. Week 2, the pipeline Greg built just had another mini crash. They lost a half day of data. Victor blamed it on legacy code from my tenure. The nerve. I told him to document everything, every failure, every quote. Be a court stenographer, I said. You never know when it will be useful. Then, on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week, it happened. I got an email. The sender was from a .gov domain. The subject line was simple: regarding your complaint number 2023-1138. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was from an EEOC investigator named Ms. Albright. The email was brief and professional. She confirmed receipt of my complaint and all attached materials. The last sentence was the one that made me sit up straight. The statistical data you provided is deeply concerning. We will be opening a formal investigation. We will be in contact to schedule a detailed interview with you shortly. I read the sentence 5 times. Deeply concerning. Formal investigation. It was on. The fuse was lit. That same afternoon, Marcus called me, his voice a hushed, excited whisper. "It's happening," he said. "What's happening?" A letter arrived this morning, federal government seal. It was addressed to the university president with copies to Brenda and Victor. I saw the envelope on the mail clerk's desk. 10 minutes later, Brenda practically sprinted out of her office and went straight to the top floor, to the president's suite. 5 minutes after that, Victor was summoned. The door's been closed ever since. I could picture it perfectly. The sudden, unwelcome intrusion of outside authority into their hermetically sealed kingdom. The dawning horror on their faces as they realized this wasn't something they could control, something they could bury with an NDA and a severance check. This was the federal government. According to Marcus, the atmosphere in the department shifted overnight. The smug confidence that had radiated from Victor's office was gone, replaced by a tense, nervous silence. He stopped his triumphant walks around the floor. His door, usually open to his favored cronies, was now permanently shut. The laughter and loud conversations died down. Fear is a remarkable silencer. A few days later, the first official notice went out. It was a bland, legally vetted email from the university's general counsel sent to all employees in my old division. It announced that the university was cooperating with a routine inquiry from a federal agency and advised anyone contacted by the agency to direct them to the legal department. Routine inquiry. The corporate euphemism was laughable. This was anything but routine. It was a signal to everyone not to talk. It was a sign of panic. My interview with Miss Albright was a week later. It was a 4-hour video call. She was sharp, incisive, and missed nothing. She didn't just ask about my firing. She walked me through every detail of my original complaint against Victor. She had me go through the spreadsheet, line by line, asking me to explain the context, the roles, the institutional structure. She wasn't just investigating my termination. She was using my case as a crowbar to pry open the entire institution. She asked about Brendan. What was her role in these decisions? Was she aware of Victor's hiring practices? Aware, I said. Ms. Albright, she was the architect. Victor could only operate the way he did because he knew with absolute certainty that HR would protect him. The data proves it. My case is not an exception, it's the rule. I could see a grim understanding dawning on her face. She was realizing the scope of it. The panic at the university started to metastasize. Marcus told me that a team of outside lawyers had descended on the administration building. They had set up a war room in a conference room down the hall from HR. They were pulling files, conducting their own internal investigation to get ahead of the EEOC. Suddenly, the divisive employee they had fired was the subject of a frantic, high-priced effort to understand just how much damage he had done. Victor tried to reassert control. He called a mandatory team meeting. Marcus gave me the play-by-play later that night. Victor stood at the front of the room looking haggard and pale and gave a speech about solidarity. He talked about external forces trying to disrupt our important work. He said there were a lot of misunderstandings and misinformation out there, and that it was crucial for the team to stay focused and trust in leadership. It was a disaster. The old guard, the veterans I had worked with for years, just stared at him with cold, dead eyes. The palpable fear emanating from him had the opposite of its intended effect. It confirmed to everyone that the rumors were true, that he was in serious trouble. He had lost the room, he had lost all authority. All he had left was his title, and it was clear to everyone that it was hanging by a thread. The real power shift came not from an internal memo, but from the outside world. A small but influential higher education trade journal published an article. The headline was stark: Federal agency launches systemic discrimination probe at state university. The article was well researched. It didn't name me, referring to me only as a former manager who was recently terminated, but it did name Victor as being at the center of the initial complaint, and it quoted an anonymous source from the EEOC who confirmed that the investigation had been expanded to include the patterns and practices of the university's Human Resources Department. Crucially, the article mentioned the statistical evidence that had triggered the wider probe. The public reveal was a devastating blow to the university's carefully curated image of a progressive, equitable institution. It was a public humiliation, and for Victor and Brenda, it was a catastrophe. They weren't just dealing with a quiet internal inquiry anymore. Their names were now publicly linked to a federal discrimination investigation. The silent takeover was over. The consequences were now very, very loud. The publication of that article was like dropping a boulder into a stagnant pond. The ripples spread quickly and in ways I hadn't even anticipated. This wasn't about clients leaving, because a university's clients, the students, are a captive audience. This was about the currency that truly matters in academia, reputation and talent, and on that front the exodus began. The first to go was Dr. Alani Sharma. A month after being rejected by Victor for his brother-in-law's useless son, she had accepted a position at a rival university, one with a better reputation and more resources. 2 months after the article about the EEOC probe came out, her first research paper was published. It was a groundbreaking piece on predictive analytics and public health that immediately got picked up by major news outlets. She was hailed as a rising star in her field. The story inevitably mentioned her academic affiliation, and our university was conspicuous by its absence. Victor hadn't just rejected a qualified candidate, he had gifted a future star to our biggest competitor. He had actively made our institution weaker and our rival stronger. His folly was now on public display. The next wave was internal. 2 of the most respected senior analysts in my old department, men I had hired and mentored over a decade ago, quietly submitted their resignations on the same day. They didn't make a scene. They had offers from private sector firms that had been trying to poach them for years. They had always stayed out of loyalty to the university's mission, and I later learned, loyalty to me. With me gone and the department's leadership a toxic mess, they had no reason to stay. Marcus described the fallout. The departure of these 2 analysts was a body blow. They were the institutional memory of the department. They were the ones who knew the legacy systems, who understood the intricate data relationships that weren't documented anywhere. They were, in short, the people who actually made things work. Greg, Victor's hand-picked doer, was useless. Chad, the Nepo baby, was worse than useless. He was a drain on everyone else's time. The department's productivity plummeted. Deadlines started to be missed. The new era of efficiency Victor had promised was a chaotic shambles. This is where the desperation began. Brendan and Victor, realizing their strategy of silence and stonewalling had failed spectacularly, tried to switch to active counter-manipulation. They needed to control the narrative, and they were clumsy and transparent about it. Brenda sent out a university-wide email announcing a new task force on diversity and inclusion, a classic corporate maneuver to look like you're doing something when you're actually doing nothing. She appointed Victor to co-chair it. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. No one was fooled. It was seen as the desperate gambit it was. Then came the move against me. One afternoon I received a thick, intimidating letter from the university's outside counsel. It was a cease and desist. It accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign, of violating my duty of confidentiality as a former manager, and most laughably, of tortious interference with their business. They threatened me with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit if I didn't immediately stop communicating with the press and current employees. I read the letter and I actually smiled. It was the last desperate roar of a dying animal. I forwarded it to my lawyer, Bill. He called me back, laughing. "This is beautiful, Vince," he said. "This is a gift. They're panicking. They're trying to intimidate a federal witness. This is obstruction." He drafted a crisp 2-paragraph response. It pointed out that my communications with a federal agency were legally protected whistleblower activities, and that any attempt to intimidate me would be reported to the EEOC as evidence of further retaliation and obstruction of a federal investigation. He also gently reminded them that the data I had shared was obtained through a legal public records request, not a breach of confidentiality. Their case was baseless, and they knew it. We sent the letter. We never heard from them about it again. The final, most pathetic attempt at manipulation came directly from Victor. My phone rang one evening from an unknown number. I answered. Vince, it's Victor. His voice was completely different. The arrogance, the condescension, it was all gone. It was replaced by a thin, reedy tone of pure desperation. "We need to talk," he said. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Things got out of hand." I said nothing. I just let him talk. Let the silence hang there. "Listen," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "What Brenda did, the firing, it wasn't my idea. She was pushing it. She felt we had to close ranks. I argued against it. I told her you were a good man." The lie was so bald-faced, so pathetic, it was almost pitiable. He was trying to throw Brenda under the bus to save his own skin. "What do you want, Victor?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. I think we can fix this," he stammered. "I've spoken with the president. We're prepared to make you a new offer, a significant one. We can bring you back. We could even create a new vice president role for you, VP of Data Integrity. You could lead the new diversity task force. We can put this all behind us." The offer was staggering in its cynicism. They weren't offering me a job because they valued me. They were offering to buy me off, to bring me inside the fortress so I would stop throwing rocks at it. They wanted to absorb their problem. They wanted me to become part of the very system I was trying to expose. "No, Victor," I said. There was a pause. "What? What do you mean, no? Did you hear the title? Vice President." "I heard it," I said. "The answer is no. This isn't about a title. It was never about a title. It was about right and wrong. You should have thought of that a long time ago." I could hear his sharp intake of breath, the sound of a man realizing he had no moves left on the board. "You're destroying my career," he whispered, all pretense gone, replaced by raw, pleading fear. "No, Victor," I said, and this was the honest truth. "You are. You're just finally seeing the consequences." I hung up the phone. The power shift was complete. They had tried to erase me, to silence me, to intimidate me, and to buy me. They had failed on all fronts. They had no leverage left. I had all of it. And I had no intention of giving it back. The end came not with a bang, but with a series of quiet official announcements. About a month after Victor's desperate phone call, a short, terse email landed in the inboxes of the university staff. It announced that Brenda, the formidable director of HR, was taking an early retirement effective immediately to spend more time with her family. Everyone knew what that meant. She had been sacrificed. She was the first casualty, the offering made to the angry gods at the EEOC in the hopes of containing the damage. It didn't work. 2 weeks after that, the other shoe dropped. Victor was placed on indefinite administrative leave pending the outcome of the ongoing investigation. His name was scrubbed from the department website. His office was emptied. He was gone. He didn't get the dignity of a retirement announcement. He was simply removed, a ghost. Just as he had tried to make me a ghost. Marcus told me that the general feeling in the office wasn't celebration, but a kind of weary, solemn relief. The fever had broken. The final confrontation, if you could call it that, was an anticlimax. It wasn't with Victor or Brenda. It was with a man I'd never met, the university's new interim general counsel, a high-priced lawyer from a downtown firm brought in specifically to clean up the mess. He requested a meeting with me and Bill, my lawyer. We met in a neutral conference room at Bill's firm. The lawyer, a man named Peterson, was calm, professional, and had the exhausted look of a man who had been reading deeply unpleasant documents for weeks. He didn't try to fight. He didn't make excuses. He came to surrender. "Mr. Vincent," he began, foregoing any first-name familiarity, "on behalf of the university, I want to express our profound regret for the circumstances of your departure. It's clear that our internal processes failed, not just for you, but for others as well." He then laid out a settlement offer. It was substantial. It included significant financial compensation for wrongful termination and retaliation, full vesting of my pension and benefits backdated to my termination, and a public letter of apology from the university president, acknowledging my service and the validity of the concerns I had raised. There was no non-disclosure agreement. There was no gag order. They knew we would never accept one. Bill handled the negotiations, but I had one condition of my own. I told Peterson that the university had to commit in a legally binding consent decree with the EEOC to a complete overhaul of its HR complaint and hiring processes, to be overseen by an independent court-appointed monitor for a period of no less than 3 years. Peterson nodded slowly. He had expected it. That's already on the table with the commission, he said. Your data made that a non-negotiable point for them. In that moment, I felt a sense of vindication so deep and so pure, it was almost overwhelming. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about getting my job back, which I had no intention of doing. It was about this. It was about forcing permanent structural change. It was about ensuring that what happened to me and to the women before me could not so easily happen again. We accepted the offer. The new reality at the university began to take shape. The consent decree was made public. The president's letter of apology was printed in the school paper. The new HR department, run by an external hire with a reputation as a reformer, started from scratch. The old boys club that Victor had built began to crumble. Without their protector, his unqualified cronies were exposed for what they were. Within 6 months, both Greg and Chad were gone, managed out for poor performance. I never went back to my old office. I didn't need to. My victory wasn't in reclaiming my old desk. It was in making that entire system accountable. Instead, I took the settlement money and my newfound freedom and decided to build something new. I started a small consulting firm. I called it Veritas Analytics, Veritas for truth. My first hire was Marcus. He had resigned from the university the day after Victor was placed on leave. He said he couldn't work for an institution that would treat me that way. Our new office is small, just a few rooms in a modest building downtown, but it's ours. We help smaller colleges and nonprofits that can't afford a full-time analytics department to build honest, effective, data-driven systems. We teach them how to use data, not to hide the truth, but to find it. Sometimes I'll be working late and I'll look up from my computer screen and see Marcus across the room hunched over a problem looking for a pattern, and I'll see the name on our door, Veritas Analytics, Vincent, founder. It's a quiet life, a good life. A life built not on surviving a broken system, but on creating a new one, however small. The institution I gave 22 years to saw me as a problem to be buried, but they forgot one simple thing. You can't bury the truth. Sooner or later it finds its way to the surface. So that's my story. It's a story about how a system designed to protect the powerful can be challenged by one person who knows the rules better than they do. It's about how data, in the right hands, can be a more powerful weapon than any title or position. They thought process was a substitute for integrity, and they learned the hard way that it's not. For anyone out there who has been overlooked, underestimated, or erased by a system that refuses to see your value, I want you to know this: your voice matters, your principles matter. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to calmly and quietly gather the facts. In a world of noise, bluster, and corporate speak, the truth has a weight and a gravity all its own. Don't ever let them convince you otherwise. Your competence, your integrity, that is your real power. Never, ever let them take that away from you. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And I'd really love to read your own stories in the comments below, so tell me about a time you saw someone fight the system and win. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and vindication. Until next time, stay strong and know your worth.